How long does your hair have to be before you start your locks? What are the implications of starting locks on short hair versus long hair? And when is really the best time to start your lock journey? My name is Lilian Okibe, and in today's video, I'm going to be answering all these questions. So let's dive in. The first question, how long does your hair really have to be before starting locks? Now, the simple answer to that question is as long as you have hair on your head. No, as long as you can see hair on your scalp, you can basically start your lock journey. But the more detailed answer to that question is that it depends on which method you're using to start. So there are so many ways you can start locks. If you guys want to know all the methods are available, I think I have a video on that. I should make an updated video on that basically, but I have a video that can give you an idea of the different methods that you can use to start locks. I'll link that video up in the iCards. But depending on the method you use, you may need shorter or longer hair to achieve the results that you're trying to go for. If you want to start your lock journey on hair that is basically less than 1 inch, you can, right? But obviously, for someone like that, you cannot be starting with a method that involves you plaiting your hair, like 2-strand twist, the Lilian Okibe locks method, or braids or anything like that. But you can use foam. If you have almost no hair and you want to start your lock journey, you can use the lock foam. So you basically just roll it on your hair every day, and as your hair grows, it is going to eventually lock into various sections until you have locks. And this is a method that many people use if they want to have more or less a freeform kind of look, like a not so manicured look. However, you can actually start your lock this method, and as your hair grows, you can eventually start to have the manicured look, depending on how you maintain your locks going forward. But you can start your locks as short as your hair is. You just have to look into what method is going to give you the best results. Now let's move on to the implications of starting locks on long hair versus short hair, because I know that this is what most of you are interested in knowing. Let's start with starting locks on short hair. Now, there are so many advantages that come with starting locks on short hair, and with the advantages come certain, I don't like to say disadvantages, but there are certain things that you may not be so excited about. Now, the first thing you notice if you start your locks with short hair is obvious. It means that you're just going to go straight into your lock journey. You don't have to wait for months or years for your hair to get to a certain length before you start. So this is going to give you locks quicker, in a sense. Now, another thing that you notice if you start your locks on very short hair, the shorter the hair, the more obvious this is going to be, is that you're going to notice hair growth a lot quicker. I'm going to explain this in more detail later when I'm talking about starting locks on longer hair. But just know that if you start your locks on short hair, the shorter your hair when you start, the faster, the quicker, or the soonest you're going to notice your hair growing, because you're starting on basically the bottom. You're starting from the bottom, so you can only go up from there. Another thing that you notice if you start your locks with short hair, very short hair, the shorter, the more obvious this is going to be, is that you're going to have to deal with shrinkage less. You're going to have to deal with less amount of shrinkage because you have less hair to battle with. Even if that little hair shrinks to maximum potential, it's not going to be, the shrinkage is still going to be more or less negligible. So you're not going to have to deal with shrinkage as much if you start your locks on short hair. Another thing you notice if you start your locks on short hair is that you're going to spend way less time maintaining your hair, whether it's washing or retwisting or whatever. Now, another thing you notice if you start your locks with very short hair is that there's a very high chance that you just had a haircut maybe a month or 2 months or 3 months ago. And so in that case, your chances of having healthy locked ends is going to be a lot higher. Because what you notice with people with longer hair is that the longer your hair, the higher your chances of having tapered hair. What I mean by that is, as you move away from your roots, your hair gets thinner and thinner. That is how it is for many people with the longer your hair, the more pronounced this is going to be. So if you're starting on short hair, you're most likely going to have blunt ends. And this is going to lead to something else I'll talk about later. You're going to most likely have blunt ends. And that means that because your ends are blunt, it's going to be basically as healthy as possible. So depending on how you eventually go ahead to maintain your hair, you're most likely going to have healthy ends. Your chances of having healthy ends will be a lot higher. Now this takes us to the next point, which is actually, it goes hand in hand with what I just shared, is the fact that you're going to have to deal with unraveling a lot more, because first off, you have very short hair, and secondly, you have very blunt ends. And if you have ever tried to braid blunt hair, then you understand why, if you have blunt hair, it doesn't hold on to style. So if, I don't know how many of you do box braids, but when you get your box braids, if it has not been picked, if it comes like blunt, or if you cut your hair extensions, you know that you're going to have to taper the ends a little bit so that it holds on to the braids when you eventually go on to do the box braids. So that is it. When your ends are blunt, your ends will not hold on to any style as much as when you have tapered ends. And so that means that you're going to have to deal with unraveling a lot more. And because you have very little hair to begin with, once your ends unravel, all your hair has unraveled. So that's another thing that you need to bear in mind if you're starting your locks with short hair. Now, another thing that you would notice, and this doesn't go for everyone who starts with short hair, but it depends on the style you're growing your locks from. So if you're someone who once had a faded haircut, so that means that when you eventually start your locks, for a while until you eventually go on to even everything, if you start your hair with short faded haircut, you're going to have uneven length of locks. If you decide to go full on, you want to have locks all over your head, then that means that for the first few, it could be months, it could be years, you may have to deal with uneven ends, or uneven lengths of your locks. Now, another thing that you notice when you start your locks with short hair is that you're definitely going to have to deal with the in-between length stage. So when you first start your locks, if you're starting with very short hair, the beginning stage, your hair is locking and you have that kind of afro-y, locky, everything is short and everything is just, it could be tapered, cut and cute, right? But as your locks get longer, you're going to get to that phase where they are short, but they are not that short. And at the same time, they are kind of long, but they're not that long. So what I mean is they are too short to just leave about, because when you first start out, you have kind of like an afro. You can just leave your hair, you don't have to style, everything is fine. But you're going to get to the stage where your locks have become too long to just leave around. Maybe they've gotten to your eyes and they're bothering you, they're getting to your neck, but at the same time they are not long enough that you can just put up in, say, a ponytail or a puff. And that stage can be a bit frustrating for many people. So that is another thing that you have to bear in mind. Another thing that you would most likely deal with if you start your locks with short hair is that you're most likely going to deal with a lot of frizz, because the more unraveling you have, the more frizzy your hair is going to look. So for the beginning stage until your hair eventually locks completely, you're going to deal with a lot of frizz. Now, those are the main things that you tend to deal with when you're starting your locks with short hair. If you started your locks with short hair and you experienced any of these things, let me know down in the comment section. And if there's anything that you experienced that I have not mentioned, go ahead and drop them down in the comment section, just to give other people heads up, people who want to go the route that you went through. Now let's move on to talking about things that you notice if you start your locks with long hair. Very long hair. The longer, the more pronounced this is going to be. The first thing I need to mention, and I always tell people this, is that you're going to deal with more shrinkage when you start your locks with longer hair. The more kinky, coily your hair is, the more pronounced this is going to be. And the longer your hair is, the more pronounced this is going to be. And so it's very common for you to see people who start their locks with very long hair and then it shrinks up so tiny, and it takes eventually years before their locks become the length of the loose natural hair that they started with. So that's something I usually tell people. And this is also why when people say, oh, my hair is so short now, I want to wait for my hair to get long before I start my locks so that I'll have longer locks. It's like, yeah, to an extent, yeah, it may be like that. But if you're someone who has really, really massive shrinkage, see, except you want to wait for 10 years, there's a very high chance that even if you start your locks 1-2 years later, the shrinkage is going to make the 2 extra years that you spent waiting for your hair to get longer not count. So when I started my locks, I had a decent length of loose natural hair. Like my hair was long to an extent, to a point that people were like, your hair is so long and everything like that. If you can go ahead to watch my older videos. But when I eventually went on to start my locks, it shrunk up to very tiny. And I had people ask me questions like, did you cut your hair? And I didn't. When I had loose natural hair, even though my hair was, I never measured the length of my hair. That's why I can't give you guys a strict length. But I had a lot of hair. But even when I had loose natural hair, I knew that my hair shrunk up to a teeny weeny afro. And so I was expecting the shrinkage. But for someone who doesn't know this, you may think, okay, let me wait for 2-3 years so that when I start my locks, I'll have longer looking locks. But for the first year, or it could even be up to 2 years, all that length that you spend that 1 or 2 extra years accumulating is not going to make any difference in how your locks will look when it comes to length. Sorry. Next thing you notice is the longer your locks, the less likely you're going to have to deal with unraveling, in the sense that the full length of your hair will come unraveled. Now you will have unraveling depending on the texture of your hair, depending on how blunt your ends are, depending on several factors, how you started your locks and all those things. But the longer your hair, the less likely you're going to have the issue of the full starter style coming completely undone. That is going to be very unlikely. What you have is, you may have maybe your ends are unraveling, but the full length of the locks are still intact. Or maybe your roots are kind of unraveling, but the rest of your hair is intact. Or maybe you may notice things like slippage for those people who start with methods like interlocking method, where it's like the knots are kind of slipping down. You may notice things like that, but you're most likely not going to have issues with your full hair coming completely undone. Yeah, and this takes us to the next point, which is the fact that because if you're starting with long hair, there's a very high chance that you have a certain amount of taper to your hair. No matter how healthy your loose hair is, it's very likely that the ends will not be as dense as the roots. You're going to have a certain amount of taper. Now, if you're starting with damaged hair, then the taper is most likely going to be more. You may have very thick hair at your roots, and then your ends are basically feathery. But even if you're starting with healthy loose hair, you're going to have a certain amount of taper, which is one of the reasons why you're most likely not going to have that much unraveling. And also, if you're starting with healthy hair that is just trimmed, then your ends are going to be a little bit more blunt. But because you have a lot of hair, like long length of hair, even if your ends unravel, the rest of your hair is still going to remain in the starter lock style. Now, another thing that you may notice if you start your locks with longer hair is the fact that you're most likely going to, it's not unusual for you to have issues like bunching. So what I mean by bunching is, when you start your locks, it may start to look like the lock is bunching up at certain areas. You know, this is something that is most likely to happen if you start your locks with long hair. The longer your hair, the most likely you're going to have to deal with this. But I don't think it's a big deal. But that's just something you need to bear in mind. Now, another thing that you notice if you start your locks with longer hair is that it's going to take forever. It's going to feel like forever. You know, it's going to take a very long time, depending on how long your hair is and how much shrinkage you naturally have. It's going to feel like forever before you start to notice hair growth. By hair growth, I mean where your hair is going to look like, yeah, my locks are growing. They are getting longer than how my loose natural hair was when I started. Now, the smaller your locks, the more pronounced this is going to be, because there's just something about having small size locks that just likes to poof up and shrink up, and it's going to get bigger, but it may take a while for you to start to see obvious growth. And that's another thing that you need to bear in mind. Similarly, you're going to notice more volume because as your hair is shrinking and poofing up, it's going to start to look bigger. So because with longer hair, you have more hair that can potentially shrink up it looks like your hair has become less, but all that length did not just disappear. It went into shrinking, like it shrunk up, and so it's going to form a certain amount of volume. And that's why I noticed this also when I started my locks. It was like, you, despite the fact, yeah, because you've started your locks and you have a lot of shrinkage, you may start with very long hair, but all that hair is going to shrink in such a way that your hair may look basically the same length with someone who started their locks with not so long hair. You know, it may look like it's the same length, but in density it's going to look different. And so, you know, you may be like, how come you have the same length of hair but your hair is obviously more dense than mine? It's the fact that you have all that hair shrinking up. So you're going to lose length, you're not going to see growth as quickly, but you're going to be glad when it comes to the volume, if you allow it, because there are certain people who are obsessed with doing all sorts of things with their hair, and then it ends up they don't reap the benefit of this. Depending on your shrinkage, you may still have to deal with the in-between length stage. I'm sorry. Depending on how your hair naturally shrinks, you may still need to deal with that in-between length stage, but it's very likely that it's not going to last as long as someone who started from the bottom, who started from almost no hair. But you're still going to need to deal with that for a while if your hair shrinks up to the point where it shrinks up to a teeny weeny afro before it starts to grow gradually. Now, another thing that you'll notice if you start your locks with longer hair is that you are going to have more styling options at the beginning stage of your journey, because obviously this goes without explaining. Obviously you have more hair, so you can do more things with the more hair. You can style in different ways, because the shrinkage is not going to come once. It's going to come gradually in phases, so you're going to have a lot more hair to play with in the early stages of your lock journey. So here again, if you started your locks with longer hair, so anything from 6 inches and above, let me know down in the comment section if you've experienced any of these things I've shared, and if there's anything that you experienced that I did not mention, also say it in the comment section just to give other people a heads up. With this, we've come to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned 1 or 2 things. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you enjoyed this video and you like to work with me on a one-on-one basis, there's so many ways that you can do this. You can enroll for my online course, which is a pre-recorded course that gives you step-by-step how to start, how to maintain, how to wash, how to basically have locks that look like mine. The link will be in the description box. If you also want to have a one-on-one consultation with me, this is also available. I'll put the link down in the description box as well. If you like to use the products that I use, or you like to know the products that I use and just check them out, they are available on my website. I'll link that down in the description box as well. Thank you so much for watching. See you in my next video.